know until quite late, until we started working with scripts and things like that, and it just kind of worked out that I had a boy and Samantha had a girl.
Elizabeth Montgomery's daughter just dropped a bombshell that's shaking all of Hollywood to its core. My mother betrayed everyone, her husband, her father, and even the angelic image the world worshipped. Those words hit like thunder because Elizabeth wasn't just Samantha from Bewitched. She was America's picture of charm and perfection. Yet behind that dazzling smile was a life full of secrets, pain, and a magic that couldn't hide the truth. She truly believed that magic could erase the past, that it could twist fate itself. But now, decades later, her daughter has shattered that illusion, revealing a story hidden for almost half a century. Why the silence? Was it fear? Or did the family truly believe that the so-called bewitched curse was real? Let's rewind to 1951, when 18-year-old Elizabeth Montgomery stood at the gates of Hollywood and boldly declared, "I will write the magic of my own life." Those words sounded like a dream, but no one knew they'd mark the beginning of a lifelong tragedy that would haunt her forever. Picture it, New York, winter of 1951. The icy wind howled through the streets, and inside a red brick house on East 61st Street, a teenage Elizabeth stood trembling before her future. She had just signed her enrollment papers for the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, the same school her father had forbidden her to ever attend. Her father, Robert Montgomery, was a star of Hollywood's golden age, a man so refined and commanding that every word he spoke was final. In their Beverly Hills mansion, life ran like clockwork, cold, spotless, and suffocating. Dinner was a ceremony, not a meal. Elizabeth had to sit straight, stay silent unless spoken to, and was absolutely forbidden to even whisper the words acting or film. Robert often repeated one sentence, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut through her dreams. Hollywood is no place for a decent woman. To him, acting wasn't art. It was deception, and he refused to let his daughter become one of those pretenders. But within those perfect, polished walls, Elizabeth's passion burned like wildfire. From childhood, she had followed her father onto movie sets, secretly mesmerized by the glow of the lights, the echo of the cameras, and the magic of transformation. She didn't just want to watch, she wanted to live it. The way the camera caught a tear, a smile, or a heartbeat, it felt like another world calling her name. At just 17, Elizabeth Montgomery's life changed in a single moment. During a visit to the MGM studio, she watched her father perform under the blinding lights and whispered, "Daddy, I want to stand there in front of the camera like you." Robert slowly turned toward her, his eyes cold as ice, and snapped, "No, I didn't raise an actress. I raised a lady." Those words sliced through her like glass. Elizabeth stayed silent, but deep inside, something fierce was born. She made a silent promise. If her father wouldn't open the door for her, she'd break one down herself. Just months later, she secretly sent her application to drama school. She told no one, leaving only a short, defiant note on her father's desk. "I'm going to learn how to live, not how to please you." When Robert discovered it, the house shook with rage. The maid later recalled how he threw the letter to the floor, stomped on it, and shouted, "That girl will regret ever bearing the Montgomery name." From that day forward, silence swallowed the home. Father and daughter barely exchanged a word. Dinner became an icy ritual, where the only sound was the clink of silverware against porcelain. But fate has a wicked sense of irony. It was Robert himself who accidentally gave Elizabeth her first break. When his television show, Robert Montgomery Presents, premiered, he offered her a small role, a supposed gesture of peace. Yet, the night the episode aired, disaster struck. As her name appeared on screen, Elizabeth Montgomery, Robert's face darkened. He lit a cigarette, exhaled slowly, and ordered coldly, "Erase that name from my show. No one uses my name to make themselves famous." The entire set froze in disbelief. That night, Elizabeth went home, locked her door, lit a candle, and poured her heart into her diary. "If my father won't let me bear the Montgomery name, I'll make the world remember it." That was the moment she cut the final thread tying her to her father's control. She packed her bags, left home, and rented a tiny apartment in Manhattan. She waited tables at night and studied acting during the day, chasing her dream with everything she had. Every role she landed, no matter how small, was her silent rebellion, a message to her father that she would never bend. Meanwhile, at the glittering parties in Beverly Hills, Robert kept his pride intact with venomous words. "That girl is no daughter of mine," he'd mutter, his tone sharp enough to silence the room. But time has a strange way of humbling even the proudest hearts. Years later, when Elizabeth had become a household name as Samantha in Bewitched, one of Robert's old friends spotted him sitting alone in a bar, his eyes locked on the TV screen. As her name flashed across the credits, he gave a faint, tired smile and murmured, "She's good, but she'll never escape my shadow." No one could tell if that smile was soaked in pride or bitterness, but for Elizabeth, it didn't matter anymore. She had won her freedom, her fame, and her name. She was finally standing in front of the camera, exactly where she'd always dreamed to be. Freedom came at a brutal cost. Her father's rejection and a wound that time could never heal. No matter how far Elizabeth Montgomery ran, she was still caught in his orbit, like a compass that always pointed back to one name, Robert Montgomery. The more she tried to break free, the more his shadow followed her, silently shaping every move she made. And when she finally walked out that family door, her love life began to mirror the same cold, painful rhythm, haunting, repetitive, and impossible to escape. New York, 1954. After 2 hard years of studying and performing in Manhattan, Elizabeth suddenly did what her father had always wanted. She got married. Her husband was Frederick Gallatin Common, a wealthy young businessman, polished and proper, the very image of what Robert would have called a perfect gentleman. Their wedding was elegant and calm, a springtime affair filled with white roses, crystal glasses, and polite smiles. On the surface, it looked like peace, but it was the calm before another storm. Because just months later, the wedding dress was tucked away in the closet, untouched, forgotten. Elizabeth stood in their fancy apartment overlooking the Hudson River, staring at her reflection and realizing she wasn't living as Elizabeth anymore. She was living as someone's wife. Frederick was kind, yes, but he wanted her silenced, framed like a painting in an Upper East Side living room, smiling but still. That wasn't her. By autumn, their marriage ended as neatly as it began. No scandal, no fight, just quiet heartbreak and a lesson she'd never forget. Love means nothing if the other person can't handle your dreams. 2 years later, in 1956, Elizabeth landed in Los Angeles, and Hollywood glittered like a trap. The lights burst like fireworks, the nights were wild, and that's when she met actor Gig Young, a man as magnetic as he was dangerous. He was charming, witty, and mysterious. But under that smooth surface was something darker, something that reminded her of her father's control. Rumors say that one night at a Beverly Hills party, Robert Montgomery was heard declaring coldly, "She's no longer my daughter." Whether true or not, those words hit Elizabeth like a punch to the heart. Maybe that's what drove her deeper into Gig's arms, a mix of rebellion and self-destruction, trying to prove she could survive without her father's approval. But Gig's love came with poison. Behind the handsome face hid a storm of alcohol, jealousy, and violence. One afternoon on a Culver City set, witnesses saw Elizabeth step out of a trailer, lipstick smeared, eyes red from tears. Gig followed behind her, muttering coldly through a tight grin that she was too sensitive to be an actress. That line cut deeper than any slap could. Their relationship spiraled until it finally broke, and when it did, Elizabeth walked away like someone who'd survived a shipwreck, breathing but forever carrying shards of that pain in her chest. Then came 1963. Malibu sunsets painted the sky gold, and at Gower Studios, a new chapter began. That's where she met William Asher, a director with sharp eyes and a warm soul. He didn't just see Elizabeth. He understood her. He saw the fear behind her confidence, the way she built her characters piece by piece, and the quiet power in her emotions. They fell in love through their work, and out of that connection came something extraordinary. Bewitched. By 1964, Los Angeles was alive with the rhythm of jazz, fast cars, and new dreams. And right in the middle of it, Elizabeth Montgomery was no longer just an actress. She was becoming a legend, casting her own kind of spell on America. When Elizabeth Montgomery twitched her nose as Samantha on screen, the world fell under her spell. Off-screen, she and William Asher were building something magical too, a family, a home, and a television empire that seemed untouchable. People whispered that Stage 5 at the studio felt more like a cozy home than a set, a place with laughter, warmth, and even the smell of fresh coffee drifting through the air. Elizabeth was pregnant, and the show cleverly wove her growing belly into the storylines, turning her real-life motherhood into television history. Behind the cameras, William watched her with pride, smiling every time the audience roared at one of her perfect comedic moments. It was the most beautiful chapter of her life, but deep down, something fragile had started to crack. The Montgomery loop, as some would later call it, was quietly beginning again. William wasn't just her partner, he was her rhythm, her compass, and sometimes her cage. He was brilliant, sharp, confident, and always in control. At first, she was grateful for his guidance, his precision, but slowly, his certainty began to swallow hers. He didn't mean to dominate, but like her father, he carried a power that filled every room. As love turned into schedules, meetings, and deadlines, they began to drift apart. Compliments were replaced by polite nods, soft gestures lost between scenes. One would reach out, and the other wouldn't see it. By the late 1960s, in their Beverly Hills mansion, the silence between them grew louder than the applause outside. Parties stretched late into the night, phone calls lingered into the morning, and rumors of William's affairs crept through the cracks like cold wind at midnight. Elizabeth never confronted him publicly, but in her diary she wrote one haunting line: "I like a man who pauses to hear himself breathe at the edge." Those words said everything. She was suffocating again, trapped in another man's tempo. When the fractures finally turned into breaks, she sought something different, a heartbeat that matched her own. That heartbeat came in the form of Richard Michaels, the young director of Bewitched's 8th season. Richard looked at her differently, not as a star, but as a woman. Someone real, someone tired of pretending everything was fine. Their affair started quietly, with glances and late-night talks on the studio lot. But Hollywood secrets don't stay hidden for long. By 1972, whispers had turned into headlines, and the gossip spread like wildfire through Columbia and Screen Gems. When the truth hit the air, it exploded, shattering the set, the marriage, and the show itself. Bewitched ended abruptly in its 8th season. The laughter cut short, as if someone had pulled the plug mid-spell. People in Hollywood called it the chain of betrayals. They said William betrayed first, then Elizabeth. And in the wreckage, she saw something she had feared her whole life. She was becoming the very person she had once despised in her father, hurting others while convincing herself she was doing what was right. Guilt has a way of clinging. It lingers like perfume that won't wash off. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, Elizabeth learned to breathe again. She walked away from the Hollywood noise, the parties, the fake smiles, the cold, scripted affection. She wasn't chasing magic anymore. She just wanted peace, and that's when she met Robert Foxworth. He wasn't a lightning strike. He was calm, steady, and real. Being with him felt like standing beside a lake instead of a storm. There was no dominance, no control, just presence. In their home in Encino and later in Beverly Hills, Elizabeth finally found what she'd been searching for all her life. Not fame, not perfection, but balance. Robert didn't try to fix her, mold her, or lead her. He simply stood beside her, quietly holding space for her to be herself. Robert Foxworth became the reflection of peace Elizabeth Montgomery had been chasing her entire life. They lived together for years before deciding to marry. A quiet, deliberate choice, nothing flashy or dramatic. It was like taking that old wedding dress from the glass case of memory and trading it for a warm sweater, perfect for the breezy afternoons in Laurel Canyon. For once, life wasn't about spectacle. It was about stillness, safety, and truth. In that calm, Elizabeth finally dared to face what had haunted her since youth, the Montgomery loop. Frederick had been safe but demanded her silence. Gig had been wild, passionate, and destructive, his love crashing like thunder. William, the genius, turned affection into control, making her feel more like a performance than a partner. Richard, her brief escape, brought tenderness, but also chaos that cost her everything. And then came Robert Foxworth, the first man who rested his hand on her shoulder without pushing, without directing, just letting her know she could stay. When she looked back at all their faces lined up in her memory, she saw it clearly. Every man had carried her father's shadow in some form. Each one whispered the same old command: be quiet, be good, stay still. And every time she tried to defy that order, something in her life cracked, until Foxworth. With him, the message finally changed. You can be you. After 1975, Elizabeth withdrew from the spotlight. She rarely discussed her private life, and when she did, her words carried a calm wisdom that stunned those who listened. One windy afternoon at the Santa Monica Pier, a reporter asked about her journey, and Elizabeth smiled gently before saying, "I no longer need to break something to prove I exist. I just need to breathe." That single sentence, soft as the sea breeze, was her declaration of freedom. She had walked through the maze and finally found the exit. Love was no longer a battlefield or a reflection of her father's rules. It had become a sanctuary, a quiet space where she could simply exist. Looking back, her romances formed a haunting pattern, like concentric circles spinning around one center: Robert Montgomery himself. He was the core, the first ring of influence. The men who followed, Frederick, Gig, William, Richard, were echoes of his voice, repeating the same lesson in different tones. Her rebellions against them were just smaller orbits within his gravitational pull. But at the edge of those circles, in the widest and calmest ring, stood Robert Foxworth, the stillness she had been searching for all along. From New York in 1954 to Los Angeles in 1972, Elizabeth's love life was a series of experiments, heartbreaks, and revelations. And through every heartbreak, she uncovered one powerful truth. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want in front of someone else. Real freedom is not needing anyone's permission to live your truth. When illness came knocking in early 1995, it was Foxworth who stayed by her side, steady, patient, and full of quiet strength. He held her hand, read her fan letters aloud, and helped her stand when exhaustion made her legs weak. Their love wasn't loud or dramatic. It was calm, loyal, and unshakable. It was the kind of love that didn't demand proof. It simply existed. In those final months, Elizabeth Montgomery shed every title the world had given her. She was no longer Samantha, no longer Robert's daughter. She was just Elizabeth, a woman tired enough to rest and finally strong enough to forgive, especially herself. If her entire love story were threaded by one color, one emotion, it would be the red line of yearning, to be herself, even while standing beside another. And only after walking through the reflections of her father, Frederick, Gig, William, and Richard, did she reach the peace she'd spent a lifetime chasing. With Robert Foxworth, the loop finally closed, and Elizabeth Montgomery was free. Elizabeth Montgomery no longer loved to prove something, or to heal an old wound. She didn't love in rebellion or for applause anymore. She loved to live. And for the first time, that love didn't shrink her. It expanded her. It wrapped around her gently, quietly, and gave her strength to walk peacefully through the final stretch of her days in Beverly Hills, 1995. After years trapped in the whirlwind of heartbreak and control, Elizabeth finally believed she'd found serenity with Robert Foxworth. But for a woman who had spent her entire life surviving chaos, true stillness didn't come easily. When love stopped being a battle, her restless spirit started to search again for purpose, for spark, for the magic that had always pulled her back to the light. So she returned to the only place that had ever truly defined her, the studio lights. And with that return, another layer of Elizabeth emerged, the woman who believed in real magic. On screen, Samantha from Bewitched only needed a twitch of her nose to change her world. But off-screen, Elizabeth Montgomery believed in something deeper, forces unseen, energy that couldn't be captured on film. She often said she could feel it, like an invisible current guiding her life. Back in Los Angeles, 1966, when Bewitched ruled television, Elizabeth had become the beating heart of the entire studio. Every morning she arrived before the crew, before the cameras even warmed up. People said she always carried a small stone in her pocket, a little charm she called her energy stone, brought from a tiny village in Massachusetts, the same land that once burned with the Salem witch trials. She swore the stone kept good energy flowing through the set, protecting everyone and keeping the work smooth. Her co-star, Agnes Moorehead, who played Samantha's mother in Dora, once said, "Before every scene, Elizabeth wouldn't speak to anyone. She'd sit still, hands on her knees, eyes closed, whispering something only she could hear. Then she'd open her eyes, and it was like a light had turned on inside her. She'd look brighter, but also far away. That mystery sparked whispers around the lot. A lighting tech claimed that one night, long after everyone had gone home, he came back to shut off the lights and froze. There was Elizabeth, sitting alone in her dressing room, surrounded by flickering candles. Her lips moved softly, as if chanting something ancient. When he nervously asked what she was doing, she just smiled and said, "It's a little ritual, to send good energy for tomorrow." To some, it was harmless. To others, it was strange, maybe even spooky. And in Hollywood, where mystery sells faster than truth, whispers turned into wildfire. Soon, tabloids jumped on the story with screaming headlines. Elizabeth Montgomery, the witch off screen, and the girl who doesn't just play a witch, she lives like one. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion. Some said she cast good luck spells on the crew. Others swore she could feel when something bad was about to happen. Reporters called her mystical. Critics called her eccentric. But Elizabeth never fought back. She didn't deny it, didn't explain, didn't show anger. She simply kept that same faint, knowing smile, a smile that drove people crazy with curiosity. Her silence became part of her legend. Some thought it was calculated, others believed it was wisdom. But whatever it was, it worked. The mystery made her even more magnetic, even more untouchable. One crew member remembered an unforgettable moment. She walked onto the set one morning, looked toward the empty audience seats, blew a kiss, and said, "Thank you for today's energy." We all froze. Nobody knew who she was talking to, but that day, every single take was perfect. Just one shot, no retakes. That was all it took for Elizabeth Montgomery to light up a scene like no one else could. Some of her closest colleagues rushed to defend her whenever the real witch rumors started flying. They insisted Elizabeth wasn't superstitious, she was spiritual. She believed in energy, in the invisible connection between emotions and outcomes. One lighting director put it perfectly. Maybe she didn't really think she was a witch, but she believed in the power of thought, and sometimes belief itself is a kind of magic. But Hollywood has never been kind to mystery. Not everyone bought into her calm explanations. Some crew members started keeping their distance, whispering behind her back. They said her eyes were too deep, too calm, like she could see through all of Hollywood's fakery and right into someone's truth. Soon, eerie little stories started to spread around the studio, lights flickering, microphones falling, props shifting with no one near them. Nothing was ever proven, of course, but in an industry that thrives on gossip and omens, coincidence turns into legend overnight. The name Elizabeth Montgomery, the real-life witch, started echoing across Hollywood like a ghostly chant. When a reporter confronted her about it in 1970, Elizabeth didn't get defensive. She just tilted her head, rested her chin on her hand, and laughed softly. Her eyes were bright, yet wistful, as she said, "If believing in good things is magic, then I suppose I really am a witch." That line became iconic, simple, clever, and haunting. It wasn't a denial, but it wasn't an admission either. It was pure Elizabeth, gentle, mysterious, and impossible not to love. Fans adored her even more after that. They didn't think of her as some dark sorceress. They saw her as someone who made life itself feel enchanted. They believed her magic wasn't from spells or curses, but from something brighter, the power of love, kindness, and the quiet belief that good energy could change everything. But that same belief slowly pulled Elizabeth inward. As the 1970s faded into the late decade, she began to drift from the glitter of Hollywood toward solitude. Friends said she often spent long hours sitting by the window, soft jazz playing, candlelight flickering across her face, writing in her journal. One line she wrote again and again was, "The light inside me is still fine." Some thought she was talking to herself. Others whispered she was reaching out to something beyond this world, maybe a place where there was no heartbreak, no betrayal, no father's shadow haunting her every move. Whatever truth lay behind those moments, one thing became certain. Elizabeth Montgomery had transformed into something Hollywood had never seen before. She was a witch without a wand, without spells. Yet somehow, she made everyone believe. People admired her, feared her, and couldn't stop loving her all at once. Her energy on set became legend. They said when Elizabeth walked into a room, the air felt different, charged, electric, alive. Some joked that she could fix a broken camera just by smiling at it. Others swore that when she was upset, even the lights flickered nervously, as if the universe itself respected her moods. Those strange energies everyone whispered about did more than make the cameras roll smoothly. They made people feel. Her presence demanded attention, respect, and a hint of awe. Because by then, Samantha the Witch wasn't just a TV character anymore. She had become part of Elizabeth herself. On screen, Samantha was gentle, playful, mischievous, the perfect fantasy wife who could solve any problem with a cute twitch of her nose. But off-screen, Elizabeth had become something far more powerful. She wasn't just the star of Bewitched, she was its queen. Her control over a scene, her aura, her quiet authority. No one questioned it. Elizabeth Montgomery wasn't just talented, she was a perfectionist to the edge of obsession. On Stage 5 in Hollywood, she ruled the Bewitched set with quiet authority. She was always the first to arrive, the last to leave, and nothing escaped her eyes. Every shot, every light, every breath of dialogue had to be just right. If something felt off, she would stop everything in an instant. No hesitation, no warning, just silence that froze the air. One crew member remembered it vividly. No one dared flip the lights on until she nodded. Elizabeth didn't need to shout. Her silence spoke louder than anger ever could. When she was displeased, the air grew thick, like thunder building before a storm. A few minutes of that quiet tension were enough to make a director redo an entire scene from scratch. Some joked, and half believed, that she was the controlling witch, a woman who could command the entire set with just one look. But for Elizabeth, it wasn't about ego, it was about excellence. She expected perfection because she gave perfection, and anyone standing next to her had to match that energy. Her relationship with Dick York, who played Samantha's husband Darren, showed this intensity better than anything else. At first, they were easy together, friendly, laughing between takes, creating that warm chemistry audiences adored. But as Bewitched skyrocketed in popularity, the long hours and endless takes began to wear everyone down. Dick's chronic back injury from an old on-set accident made things worse. He struggled to keep up, often needing breaks in the middle of filming. Elizabeth, disciplined to her core, had trouble accepting anything less than total focus. One day in early 1968, during the filming of the episode A Very Special Delivery, Dick York suddenly collapsed mid-scene. The entire crew panicked. Elizabeth rushed to him first, but instead of fussing, she simply stood there in silence, her eyes fixed on him for a brief, unreadable second before turning away. After that day, something in the air between them shifted, permanently. Dick took a long medical leave, and when he returned, things were never the same. On set, they spoke only in character. When the cameras stopped rolling, they walked in opposite directions, avoiding each other completely. One crew member said, "She never looked him in the eyes again. It was like watching two magnets repel each other." By 1969, as Dick's health continued to decline, the studio faced a brutal choice, either end Bewitched or replace him. Then came the whispers. People on the lot claimed Elizabeth had quietly pushed Screen Gems executives to bring in a replacement, someone she considered more reliable and better aligned with her energy, Dick Sargent. The studio agreed, and when Sargent appeared in Season 6, fans were stunned. Letters flooded the network offices, angry, emotional, demanding answers. Loyal viewers accused Elizabeth of driving her co-star out of the show. "How could Samantha betray her own Darren?" the headlines read. But Elizabeth never defended herself. She didn't explain, didn't deny. She let the silence speak again, and when a reporter finally cornered her for comment in 1970, she simply smiled and said, "We had to keep going. Every kind of magic needs change to survive." That calm, cryptic answer only deepened the controversy. Some praised her for professionalism, others called her cold. But one thing nobody dared argue, Elizabeth Montgomery was in total control. After that, Bewitched became her kingdom. From directors to cinematographers, from costume designers to background extras, everyone moved carefully around her. She wasn't just the star anymore. She was the power behind the curtain. People respected her brilliance but feared her precision. Everyone on set knew Elizabeth Montgomery didn't need to yell to get what she wanted. She never barked orders, never raised her voice. But if she wasn't satisfied, the entire scene would be redone, no matter how perfect it looked on camera. People used to whisper, "No one dares to challenge Elizabeth, not even the director." There was one unforgettable day when she demanded that the entire lighting setup be changed. Her reason? She simply said, "The energy isn't clear today." Some crew members rolled their eyes, but strangely enough, after the adjustments were made, that very scene became one of the most breathtaking moments of the entire season. Michael Gordon, a second unit director who worked with her, once summed it up perfectly. She didn't need power, she radiated it, but that same force that made her unstoppable on set also made her painfully lonely. When the shooting day wrapped, the rest of the crew would head to bars on Melrose Avenue to celebrate, laughing and drinking late into the night. Elizabeth, though, would quietly slip away. She'd drive back to her small house in Beverly Hills, where only candlelight, soft jazz, and the faint smell of jasmine welcomed her home. It was her peace and her prison. By the end of 1972, when Bewitched finally wrapped after 8 iconic seasons, there was no farewell party, no dramatic goodbye. Elizabeth didn't even show up for the wrap-up interview. Instead, she sent the studio a short note that simply read, "Thank you for the magic. It's time for Samantha to sleep." With that, she closed the curtain on a role that had defined her, and walked away from the studio that had both made her a star and drained her soul. For years after, her name still floated through Hollywood like a myth. They called her the real witch, the woman who could bend a crew to her will with one glance, who turned sound stages into worlds of her own, but who paid dearly for that gift when the lights went out. More than one person remembered her final moments on the Bewitched set, Elizabeth alone, staring into the dressing room mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't Samantha. It was Elizabeth herself, tired, strong, and stripped of every illusion. The sparkle that once danced in her eyes had faded. The magic was gone, at least on the surface. After Bewitched, Elizabeth slipped out of Hollywood's spotlight. She worked only occasionally, choosing quiet over fame. At last, she seemed ready to live a simple life with her fourth husband, Robert Foxworth, the one man who offered peace instead of chaos. But even as she tried to fade away, Hollywood couldn't forget her. Every time Bewitched reran on television, Samantha's smile filled living rooms again, bright, timeless, and weightless. To the world, she was still the eternal witch who could fix anything with a twitch of her nose. No one could have guessed that the woman who once made millions believe in magic was now facing something even she couldn't charm away: death. Spring, 1995, Miami. Elizabeth was 62, on set filming the TV movie Deadline for Murder from the files of Edna Buchanan. The Florida heat was brutal, but Elizabeth kept working as always. Until one afternoon, she began to feel faint. She brushed it off, thinking it was just the sun. Over the phone, she told Foxworth, "I'm fine," her voice calm as ever. But her colleagues saw what she wouldn't admit. Her skin had gone pale, her breathing shallow, and that familiar glow in her eyes seemed to flicker like a dying candle. When she flew back to Los Angeles, Foxworth insisted she see a doctor at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, the same place where countless Hollywood legends had been treated. The tests came back quickly, and the results were devastating. Late-stage colorectal cancer. The disease had already spread to her liver. The news hit like a thunderclap. Elizabeth sat in silence, clutching the edge of her robe, and asked softly, "How long do I have?" The doctor didn't answer. He didn't have to. She already knew. True to her spirit, Elizabeth made one final choice, one that only a woman who had always believed in freedom and energy could make. She refused to be hospitalized. She told Foxworth, "I don't want to die under cold hospital lights. I want to see candlelight, hear music, and smell the wood of my house." A few days later, she returned to her small Beverly Hills home. The same home she had once filled with jasmine and music. The same quiet refuge where she'd hidden from the world after Bewitched. There, by the window where an old piano stood, she prepared to face the one moment no spell could reverse. Elizabeth Montgomery, who had once made the whole world believe in magic, was ready to meet reality on her own terms, with grace, peace, and the quiet light she had carried all her life. Robert Foxworth never left her side, not for a single night. He sat beside Elizabeth Montgomery's bed, holding her hand, reading her fan letters aloud in that soft, steady voice she loved so much. Letters poured in from around the world. Messages filled with gratitude, stories of childhood, and memories of laughter that she had unknowingly gifted to millions. In those final quiet nights, Elizabeth did something that no one knew about until years later. Foxworth revealed it in a rare interview. One evening, I walked into the room and saw her burning something in the fireplace. It was a stack of old letters, dozens, maybe hundreds, all in her father Robert Montgomery's handwriting. He said she didn't offer any explanation, just a faint, bittersweet smile. When the fire died down, she kept one single photograph, a black and white picture taken in 1940 when she was just 7 years old. In it, little Elizabeth is hugging her father, beaming up at him. "It's the only photo where he ever looked at me gently," she whispered. Then she slid that photo into the final page of her diary. Beneath it, she had written one last line. "Father never believed in magic, but I do, even if it's only to keep him in my heart." On May 18, 1995, just 33 days after her 62nd birthday, Elizabeth Montgomery passed away in her sleep. It happened in that very Beverly Hills home she loved so much, surrounded by the scent of jasmine and candlelight. No hospital lights, no machines, just soft jazz playing in the background and Robert Foxworth's hand in hers. The next morning, news broke across America. The headlines read, "Television's last classic witch has passed." Fans wept, reruns of Bewitched played on endless loops, and an entire generation mourned the woman who had once made magic feel real. But not long after the funeral, something eerie began to stir. Strange stories started surfacing from all corners of Hollywood. Whispers that something about Bewitched hadn't truly ended. Within less than a decade, several actors from the show died unexpectedly. Alice Pierce, who played nosy neighbor Gladys Kravitz, Dick York, the original Darren, and Paul Lynde, who played Uncle Arthur. Most passed in middle age, from sudden illness or tragic accidents. It was enough to send tabloids into a frenzy. Soon, the rumor mill named it the Bewitched Curse. Reporters claimed that Stage 5, the same soundstage where the sitcom had been filmed, was haunted. Security guards swore the lights would flicker late at night, even when the power was off. Some claimed they'd seen a shadowy figure in a white dress gliding past the spot where Samantha's living room used to stand. One technician even said, "I was shutting off the power one night when I heard laughter, soft, playful, exactly like Samantha's laugh on TV." Of course, no one could ever prove any of it, but that didn't stop the stories. The rumors grew so persistent that Screen Gems reportedly hired overnight security to patrol the empty set. Hollywood thrives on mystery, and nothing spreads faster than the ghost of a legend. A Los Angeles Times journalist once wrote, "Perhaps they invented the curse themselves. In Hollywood, nothing is more immortal than an unsolved legend." But to those who had truly known Elizabeth, the so-called curse wasn't supernatural. It was poetic. They said her death didn't cast a shadow. It simply closed a story that had burned too brightly for too long. Elizabeth Montgomery was a woman who lived every emotion at full flame: love, pain, ambition, and grace. She believed she could control every scene, every light, every heartbeat in her world. But in the end, she faced the one truth no magic could bend. Even Samantha the Witch, with all her sparkle and charm, couldn't change the one spell that binds us all: time itself. Elizabeth Montgomery's funeral was held quietly at the Cannon Theater in Beverly Hills. No grand red carpet, no spotlight, just a soft farewell for the woman who once made the world believe in magic. Jazz legend Herbie Hancock played one of her favorite pieces, filling the hall with a gentle, bittersweet rhythm. Then, Robert Foxworth stepped forward, his voice trembling as he read a few final lines from her journal. "If magic exists, it lives in human kindness, where love has never truly died." That sentence lingered in the air like a blessing. The woman who'd embodied television's most charming witch was gone, yet her magic, real or imagined, refused to fade. More than 3 decades have passed since then, and Bewitched still flickers on television screens around the world. Every time Samantha twitches her nose and flashes that mischievous smile, audiences remember Elizabeth Montgomery, the woman who convinced an entire generation that a touch of wonder could still exist in ordinary life. But her story also left a haunting lesson. Every kind of magic has its own shadow. After her funeral, Hollywood couldn't let her legend rest. One phrase began circulating across studios, whispered like an incantation. Anyone who ever stepped onto the Bewitched set carries with them a piece of its magic and its darkness. 30 years have passed since Elizabeth's death, but only now has her daughter, Rebecca Asher, broken the long silence. In a recent interview, she finally said the words that seemed to unlock everything. My mother betrayed, loved, believed, and feared. But above all, she just wanted to be loved as an ordinary human being. That simple sentence hit like truth, wrapped in sorrow. It explained everything: the ambition, the control, the mystery behind her eyes. The world knew Samantha, the sparkling witch with the perfect smile. But behind that role, behind the gossip, the marriages, and the glamour, Elizabeth Montgomery was simply a woman chasing love, a love she never fully found in her lifetime. Friends often said she was full of contradictions. To the public, she seemed calm, graceful, endlessly composed. But inside, there was a storm. Compassionate yet distant, powerful yet afraid of losing herself, she was always balancing between strength and vulnerability. One of her closest friends, screenwriter Susan Harris, once said, "She had real magic, not from her nose twitch, but from her eyes. That look made you feel both seen and kept outside at the same time." That was the paradox of Elizabeth Montgomery. She could make people feel connected and excluded in the same breath. She drew people in, but never too close. There was always an invisible line, a quiet wall protecting the most fragile part of her. Still, she was known for her generosity. On set, Elizabeth was always the first to offer help to young actors, sometimes with advice, sometimes with money, and often with her quiet encouragement. Many said she was a mentor who didn't just open doors, she pushed people through them. But when the lights dimmed and the workday ended, she slipped back into her solitude. In her later years, she stepped away from Hollywood's chaos and poured her energy into causes that mattered. She joined children's charities, spoke out against the Vietnam War, and became a proud voice for the women's equality movement. It was as if she was trying to heal the wounds left by her father's rigid beliefs, the man who once declared that women belonged behind men, not beside them. Some of her friends believed that activism became her redemption. Others thought it was simply her truth finally finding a voice. Whatever it was, Elizabeth Montgomery spent her final years giving the world the one kind of magic she had always believed in: the power of kindness, empathy, and change. Even now, decades later, when people watch Bewitched and see Samantha's twinkling eyes, they're seeing more than a character. They're seeing Elizabeth herself, the woman who fought her father's shadow, the woman who lived between light and loneliness, the woman who taught the world that even magic has a human heart. In one of her final interviews back in 1989, Elizabeth Montgomery said something that summed up her entire life in a single line: "I can't change what my father taught, but I can live by what he feared most: freedom." It was pure Elizabeth, quiet defiance wrapped in grace. In her later years, she lived a calm, private life in her Beverly Hills home with Robert Foxworth. That little house, filled with soft candlelight, the scent of jasmine, and warm wooden tones, was her sanctuary. Yet even there, one thing never left her: the shadow of her father. No matter how far she had come, Robert Montgomery's voice still echoed softly through her memories. Then, in 2025, 3 decades after her death, the world was reminded just how deeply that shadow ran. During an exhibition honoring the 30th anniversary of Elizabeth Montgomery's passing, her family unveiled something no one had ever seen before. Inside a glass case sat an old diary, its edges yellowed with time. Beside it lay the same black and white photograph Elizabeth had clutched in her final days. The one from 1940, showing 7-year-old Elizabeth hugging her father, her smile bright, his expression rare and tender. But the true shock came from what was tucked inside the diary, a letter, handwritten and never sent. It read, "Dearest Father, it took me many years to understand why you never told me I was good, why you feared that I was like you. Now I understand. Neither of us knew how to love without hurting. I forgive you. Perhaps I am more like you than I thought." When her daughter, Rebecca Asher, read the letter aloud during the memorial, the audience fell utterly silent. Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone with fierce pride. "My mother was not just an actress," Rebecca said softly. "She was the one who taught me that real magic doesn't live in a twitching nose, but in the courage to forgive, even your own past." In that moment, the room felt still, like time itself was holding its breath. A gentle breeze drifted through the open doors, brushing against the old Bewitched posters on the wall. For a second, Samantha's printed smile seemed almost alive, glowing faintly under the museum lights. 30 years later, Elizabeth Montgomery was still there, not in body, but in spirit, in memory, in the hearts of those who had grown up under her spell. She remained the woman who once made the world believe in magic, yet never found the one spell she truly longed for, to be loved, fully and simply, by her father. And maybe that's what made her story so haunting, so unforgettable. That quiet, unfulfilled longing was her real enchantment, the thread that tied her art to her pain, her smile to her silence. Even now, her presence lingers like soft perfume in the air. People still talk about her the way one might talk about a dream, half real, half illusion. She wasn't just Samantha the Witch or the Golden Girl of television. She was something far more human, a woman who learned that forgiveness is the truest kind of magic. As the exhibition closed that night, the lights dimmed slowly, leaving only the soft glow of the display case. The letter, the diary, the photo, all resting quietly together. Outside, Los Angeles hummed like it always had, but inside that small room, time felt suspended. 30 years after her death, the story of Elizabeth Montgomery still refuses to end. Like Samantha's timeless nose twitch, just hearing her name, Elizabeth, is enough to awaken something tender in people's hearts. She represents a golden age of television, yes, but also something deeper: faith, forgiveness, and the fragile beauty of being human. Because in the end, Elizabeth Montgomery's greatest spell wasn't cast on screen. It was cast in life itself, a reminder that within each of us, no matter how wounded or weary, there's still a spark of magic left. If only we remember how to love and forgive. That legend isn't just the story of a Hollywood star, it's a mirror for all of us. Behind every flicker of magic, there's a heart that's known pain, loss, and longing. Elizabeth Montgomery wasn't only the bewitched witch who twitched her nose and made the world laugh. She was a woman who lived, loved, hurt, and forgave in the most human way possible. Her story reminds us that even those who seem untouchable carry invisible scars. She wasn't just enchanting audiences, she was teaching them something deeper, that real power doesn't come from perfection, but from compassion. And if any magic truly lingers after all these years, it's the kind Elizabeth left behind, the kind that whispers to us that kindness and courage can still soften the hardest sorrows. It's in her eyes, her smile, and the grace she carried even through heartbreak. That's the true spell she cast, the one that never fades. If this story touched a corner of your heart, drop a comment below and tell us what part of Elizabeth's life moved you the most. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into Hollywood's hidden stories. We've got more legends to uncover. The scandals, the secrets, and the soft glimmers of magic still echoing behind those old studio lights. Because in Hollywood, every smile casts a shadow, every legend leaves a whisper. And somewhere in those whispers, the spirit of Elizabeth Montgomery still reminds us. Real magic lives where love and forgiveness meet. See you in the next video.